Sounds like science fiction. Secret government experiments, mind control, hallucinogens, and a sprawling web of psychological tests that span 3 decades. But this is no conspiracy theory. It's a documented part of U.S. history. This is the truth about MKUltra. In the early 1950s, during the height of Cold War paranoia, the CIA launched one of the most controversial and clandestine programs in American intelligence history. It was called MKUltra, a top-secret initiative aimed at discovering methods to control the human mind. The fear? That Soviet or Chinese forces had already developed mind control techniques. The goal? To catch up or get ahead by any means necessary. What began as small, classified research quickly exploded into a vast network of experiments conducted across hospitals, universities, prisons, and even unsuspecting public spaces. This wasn't just about information. It was about transformation, about reaching into the most sacred place of human experience, the mind, and twisting it. Drugs, psychological torture, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and even electric shock therapy were all part of the toolkit. But behind this scientific exterior was something far more disturbing: a willingness to violate every ethical standard in pursuit of control. And what happened behind those locked doors would remain buried for decades, until a single mistake exposed everything. To understand MKUltra, we must first look at the world that birthed it. In the aftermath of World War II, the global balance of power shifted. The Cold War gripped the world in fear and secrecy. The arms race wasn't just about nuclear warheads, it was about ideas, about influence, and most disturbingly, about minds. The CIA, under the leadership of Allen Dulles, launched Project MKUltra in 1953. Its purpose? To develop techniques that could influence behavior, extract information, and potentially create super agents immune to interrogation. The techniques varied wildly. Some experiments focused on hypnosis and memory manipulation. Others sought to induce states of psychosis and amnesia. And then there were the chemical experiments, the most infamous of which involved LSD. But here's the shocking truth. Most of the people who were experimented on had no idea. They were mental health patients, prison inmates, drug addicts, and even hospital patients undergoing treatment for unrelated issues. They were selected precisely because no one would miss them. MKUltra's reach was vast. Over 80 institutions participated, many unknowingly. The CIA funneled money through front organizations and funded studies under innocent-sounding names like behavioral research. By the mid-1950s, the CIA had developed a network of doctors, professors, and researchers willing to push ethical boundaries in the name of national defense. But what was sacrificed in the process was not just safety, it was humanity. Every shadowy program needs a mastermind. For MKUltra, that man was Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb wasn't a stereotypical villain. He was a soft-spoken chemist, a nature lover, and a man of paradoxes. But under his guidance, MKUltra became one of the most unethical scientific undertakings in U.S. history. Nicknamed the Poisoner-in-Chief, Gottlieb orchestrated dozens of experiments involving LSD and other psychoactive drugs. He believed that to control a person's mind, you first had to destroy it, erase their identity, fragment their personality, and then rebuild them from scratch. Gottlieb set up CIA safe houses in cities like San Francisco and New York. There, under the guise of legitimate research, he had civilians unknowingly dosed with LSD. Prostitutes were hired to lure in targets. Behind two-way mirrors, agents observed and took notes. It was called Project Midnight Climax, and it was as surreal as it was sinister. Gottlieb also traveled the world, testing toxic substances and interrogation methods on foreign prisoners, often without the knowledge or consent of local governments. The trail of damage left in his wake is staggering. Yet despite overseeing a program of such magnitude and moral compromise, Gottlieb lived quietly after retirement. He never faced prosecution. He even went on to run a leprosy hospital in India. To some, he was a patriot. To others, a mad scientist who got away. One of MKUltra's most bizarre operations was Project Midnight Climax, a name as unsettling as the work it described. In this program, CIA operatives created fake brothels staffed with hired sex workers in major U.S. cities. Unwitting patrons were invited in, offered a drink secretly laced with LSD, and then watched through two-way mirrors. The goal? To observe how individuals reacted under the influence and determine whether they could be manipulated into revealing secrets or losing control. What began as a scientific inquiry quickly turned into a perverse playground of voyeurism, exploitation, and unchecked power. Agents reportedly engaged in long sessions of observation, sometimes with unclear objectives. There were no consistent records, there was no oversight, and no one, not even within the CIA, fully knew how far the experiments went. Beyond midnight climax, similar LSD tests were conducted on unsuspecting civilians, including hospital patients and soldiers. Some of them experienced lasting psychological trauma. A few even took their own lives. The experiment had become the monster, and the monster no longer needed a reason to grow. In 1973, after the Watergate scandal and growing distrust in U.S. intelligence, then CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MKUltra records. Over 20,000 documents were shredded. It seemed the secrets would die in the flames. But a clerical error saved a few boxes of financial files. 2 years later, in 1975, the Church Committee, a Senate investigation into government abuses, uncovered those remaining records. The revelations were explosive. Testimonies confirmed that U.S. citizens had been drugged without consent, that mental hospitals were sites of psychological torture, that foreign nationals had been experimented on with no diplomatic protections. One story in particular shocked the nation: the case of Frank Olson, a government scientist who was unknowingly dosed with LSD by Gottlieb's team. Days later, he plunged from a hotel window. His death was ruled a suicide, but investigations decades later suggested he may have been silenced. Families of victims demanded justice. Laws were changed, but most perpetrators went unpunished. Most victims never got answers. The program that was never meant to exist was now a permanent stain on U.S. history. Today, MKUltra remains one of the most chilling reminders of how secrecy can spiral into savagery. The program was officially shut down, but the ethical scars remain. Thousands of Americans, mental patients, prisoners, soldiers, and everyday citizens were turned into lab rats. Their trauma became data, their pain became science. And in the shadows of this project, we're left with hard questions. What are the limits of government power? How do we protect the rights of individuals in times of fear? And what secrets remain buried? The ripple effects of MKUltra are still felt. Modern discussions about surveillance, data collection, and psychological manipulation often echo the same themes. Because MKUltra wasn't just about LSD. It was about control. It teaches us that the greatest threat to liberty may not always come from the outside, but from the institutions that claim to protect it. MKUltra wasn't a myth. It was a warning. If the story moved you, help share the truth. Like, comment, and subscribe to Empire Mindset, because history has shadows, and knowledge is the only light that reveals them.